Chapter 6. An Unexpected Ally. Now, not long after the other world had been discovered, a curious thing came to light as more people crossed the Great Divide. That for every man of Mendelora, and every woman, and every child, there existed a counterpart on the opposing side, a twin of sorts, whose fate intertwined with the other. When great trouble struck one, the other suffered too. When one fell to tragedy, the other held the cure. When one was attacked, the other was drawn to their rescue. The blow came so suddenly that I felt no pain. I didn't even have a chance to cry out. The car slammed on its brakes, but still had enough momentum to knock me flat on my back. My head struck the pavement and I saw stars. I lay dazed, breathing hard. For the first few seconds I didn't move. I was aware that the car had stopped, and that the driver had come running in a panic to where I lay. He was an older gentleman with a graying beard and one of those old-style fedora hats, and he fell to his knees beside me. "Oh, no, 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 miss, are you all right? I am so sorry. Please talk to me. Are you okay?" I opened my mouth, but the only sound that came out was a weird croak. I coughed and tried again. "What happened?" The man looked around anxiously until he saw someone nearby, and he shouted to them to come over. A moment later, a boy kneeled close to my face. "Hey, can you hear me?" the boy asked. "I think so," I replied stupidly, my mind a confused mess. The adrenaline that had flowed in my veins because of the demon now died away, leaving me shaking. My vision blurred. I moaned in pain and tried to sit up. The boy and the old man helped me over to the curb, one of them on each side. I sat down and put my head between my knees to stop the dizzy feeling. The back of my skull ached. My shoulders also hurt, as if most of my weight had landed on my shoulder blades. Nothing seemed broken, at least. I glanced down at my hands and tested my fingers. They wiggled just fine. That was a relief. The old man had rushed to his car to move it out of traffic. Now he came rushing back in a flustered mess, sitting next to me and continuing to apologize. "I am so sorry, miss," he said, checking me over for injuries. "You came out of nowhere and I couldn't stop." I blinked at him, then glanced up and looked around. To my surprise, I sat next to an intersection only a block and a half from Peter's apartment, and cars had stopped from all sides to see what the commotion was all about. I was the center of attention. I cringed at that, then cringed even more when I wondered what I must have looked like to the rest of them. Had I appeared in the middle of the road, like I'd been dropped there by magic? A sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach told me that I had, especially considering that the poor gentleman who'd hit me talked about me coming from nowhere. Maybe I had literally come out of nowhere. I tried to grin at the old man to reassure him. "It's all right, I think I'm good. I just need to sit here for a minute." "You sure?" the boy asked from my other side. "I just called 911, they're on the way." I turned to thank the boy for coming over, when I suddenly saw the face of Sean Ellis. My jaw dropped. "You!" I stammered in surprise. I hadn't gotten a clear look earlier with my eyes still full of tears, plus everything had happened so fast. My flesh went prickly, although the burning I felt in my gut had nothing to do with my crush on him. My good feelings had been dashed pretty spectacularly by the boy himself when he told me off outside his apartment. I flushed with confused anger. "You? What are you doing here?" "I came over to see if you are all right," Sean replied, just as a police car whipped around the far corner with blue lights strobing. He gave me a strange look, before standing up and letting the blue-clad officer get closer to me. "Good afternoon, ma'am, sirs," the officer drawled in a pleasant southern accent. "We received a call saying that a girl had been hit by a car." He eyed me up and down, studying me for injuries. "I assume that's you, miss." I nodded. The old man stood up and approached the officer. "My name's Benjamin, sir, Benjamin Duff. The young lady came out of nowhere, officer," he pleaded. "I swear it was a complete accident." "How about we let the lady speak first?" the cop replied, waving to the stopped traffic to start moving again. The cars cluttering the intersection reluctantly drove on, and traffic returned to normal. The cop, meanwhile, crouched down so that I didn't have to stare up at him to talk. He pulled a notepad and pen out of his breast pocket. Now then, let's start with you. What's your name, miss? I gave him my name and address, and he nodded to himself as he wrote. Good. Okay, Germaine, how did you find yourself in the path of a moving car? His tone was reassuring, but I found myself tongue-tied anyway. How had I gotten there? I was running, I tried, vaguely. I thought I'd gotten lost coming home from my after-school job. I stopped, my mind stalling. What could I tell him that would approximate the truth, in a way that he'd believe me? She was coming home from my place, sir, Sean broke in smoothly. She works with my mom and my little brother, and she's only been to our apartment for the first time today. I saw her come out of the alleyway right there, and I guess she just didn't realize how busy this intersection was at this time of day. He gestured to the elderly gentleman and shrugged. There was no way this Mr. Duff could have stopped any faster than he did. It's really nobody's fault. The officer looked at Sean, then at the man who'd hit me, then back at me. Does that sound about right, miss? I stared at Sean. His statement was completely truthful, which impressed me, and yet it still saved me from the trouble of explaining the unexplainable. My anger at him lessened a degree, and when I turned back to the cop, I nodded. Yeah, that sounds about right. It was an accident. I felt the back of my head. Although I hit the pavement kinda hard, I think I want to visit the hospital just to be sure. I can help with any kind of medical bills she might incur, Benjamin piped up. I really want to make this right. The police officer tapped his pen against his notepad, thinking. At length he stood up and adjusted his hat, composing himself. That's acceptable. I'm still taking all the information I need for my report, though, and so you both have each other's info. While we swapped names and phone numbers, an ambulance appeared and parked at the curb. As the EMTs strapped me to the rolling stretcher, I heard Sean off to my right asking whether he could ride in the ambulance with me to the hospital. The lead EMT, a burly black man with a giant friendly smile and close-cropped hair, pointed over to me. It's her call, man, not mine. If she wants you to come, you're welcome to it as long as you stay out of our way. Sean approached the stretcher and looked down into my immobilized face. Is that okay? I studied his face, my heart suddenly beating harder. My anger at him and my gratitude battled for control. I licked my lips and tried to nod, but the neck brace made that awkward. Okay, you can come to the hospital. He smiled tightly and turned to jump into the ambulance when I called after him. If you call my dad and explain what happened... He pulled out his phone, took the number from me, then walked away to make the call. The officer seemed satisfied, and he pocketed his pad and pen before striding back to his patrol car. With a squeal of tires, he punched away and went flying down the street. Meanwhile, the EMTs packed me into the back of the ambulance and hopped up next to me on a side bench, and Sean took the opposite bench seat. Before the doors closed, Benjamin leaned in with one last apologetic look, his hat in his hands. He gave me a little salute with a gnarly hand. Good night, miss. I'm sorry about all this trouble. Call me when you feel better, just to let me know you're all right. I tried to see down the length of my body where he stood at my feet, and I gave him a little wave with my strapped arm. I will. Thank you, sir. The gentleman smiled at me, a little more reassured that I was okay. All right, then. And, young man, he continued, pointing at Sean, make sure she gets home in one piece. He donned his hat and headed back to his car. The techs shut the rear doors, and the ambulance jolted to life as it headed across town to Shanesville Memorial Hospital. The smell of diesel exhaust briefly wafted in before we picked up speed. The techs chatted together as they kept an eye on me, their demeanor relaxed and professional. That helped to settle the jitters still knocking around my system. I tried to turn my head back towards Sean. I think I can get back home in one piece without your help, I said. Thanks all the same. I said you could come to the hospital, not home. It's okay, I'll come with you, no problem. My temper flickered. Oh, right, I remember. You said earlier that what I think doesn't matter. He glanced over at me with a sudden scowl. That's not what I meant, he protested. I mean, I didn't mean it that way. Can I say something? I tried to shrug in the restraints. Fine, go ahead. Sean stared down at his hands. I'd come to apologize. I stared at him. Apologize? Yes, Sean replied. As soon as I slammed the door on you, I knew that I was being a jerk. I came right back out to tell you that I was sorry. I continued to stare. I didn't hear you come back out. Sean gave me a wary glance. No, how could you have heard me? As soon as I walked back out the front door, you disappeared. My eyes widened with a weird horror. Disappeared? I croaked. Had he seen what happened to me? His voice lowered and he leaned closer. Yeah, and when I say disappeared, I mean you disappeared. Like you just melted into thin air. One moment you were holding on to the street sign, next moment you just rippled out of existence. He had seen the whole thing. I knew that playing dumb wouldn't help, so I took a deep breath. I know, I hissed under my breath. Can we talk once we get to the hospital? He was happy to oblige. We sat in uncomfortable silence for a long time before my conscience pricked me. I cleared my throat. Thank you, by the way. For what? For stepping in when you did, explaining what happened and all that. Don't mention it, Sean said, shifting on the hard metal seat. You look like someone who doesn't have a lot of experience talking to cops. Is that bad? I asked with a frown. I didn't say that. It kinda seemed like you did. But I didn't, okay? Sean said with an exasperated sigh. He cracked his knuckles, looking away from me towards the front of the vehicle. Oh, and your dad sounded pretty worried. I told him who I was and that you were okay, just a little banged up. He'll pick you up from the hospital later. He, said he was at your grandma's house? Yeah, I mumbled back. He's bringing Grandma and my great-aunt over to our house tonight. Okay. We lapsed back into awkward silence, which mercifully didn't last very long, since we arrived at the hospital not 3 minutes later and I was unpacked from the ambulance. The EMTs wheeled me into a curtained area under bright fluorescent lights and transferred me to a bed. Once they were gone, Sean wheeled a stool over to me and sat down. It was then that I got a good second look at his eyes. The suspicious light that had burned there earlier had faded, replaced by a kind of weary sadness. It was the kind of weariness that usually comes from age, like I'd seen sometimes in my grandma's eyes. But with him, it must have come from grief, either over his dad or Peter, or both. Sean leaned in, checking to see that no one else was in earshot. Now tell me what happened. You were standing right there, not 20 feet away from me. You vanished and I ran out here to see where you'd gone. I was sure I'd been tricked. But it must have been 10 minutes that I waited and looked, and I couldn't find you anywhere. Then I saw what I thought might have been your shadow on the wall in the alleyway back there, so I came running out just in time to see you get hit by the car. He sat waiting for a reply, and I lay on the bed listening to myself breathe, my mind a turmoil. What was I supposed to tell him? The truth had to be the best way. It was the only thing he'd accept. He was waiting for a serious answer, and he deserved one. But the truth sounded so ludicrous that I feared he'd laugh in my face. Would it sound like a cop-out if I said that I had no idea what happened? Sean frowned. A little. He moved a little closer, and his closeness ratcheted my heart rate up a notch. But I just saw you vanish, Germaine. So I think I'd have to believe whatever you're going to tell me, no matter how crazy it sounds. Reassured, I sat up on the bed and fiddled my fingers together, trying to find the words. I was standing by the signpost, and then it was like the world just swallowed me and I fell. I landed in the middle of a forest, and I had no idea where I was. Sean's brows knitted. A forest? Yes, a giant dark forest where everything looked gray and dull, like a black and white photo, except not quite. It was like the color had just been sucked away and a weird fog had settled on everything. Sean grew more interested. You'd never seen this place before? Ever? No, never. What happened then? I said something out loud, and a voice answered me. I couldn't see who it was until I realized it was coming from near the ground. I closed my eyes in embarrassment. It, it was a lizard. Sean's eyes widened. A lizard? A lizard spoke to you? Yes. I suddenly glared at him, wondering if he was just trying to make fun of me. I promise you what I'm telling you is the truth. He held up his hands defensively. I'm not making fun of you, he insisted, his expression still serious. But give me some time to process what you've just told me. I sighed. I'm sorry, but it's true. Completely true. I had a conversation with him. He told me his name, and I told him my name, and he told me that he is a keeper. A keeper? Like a guardian, I think? I took a long, steadying breath. He told me I was in the web of worlds, whatever that means, the space between. Sean stared at me, but not with the incredulous look I expected. Instead, he looked fascinated. The space between what, exactly? He asked, studying my face. I'm not sure. The lizard called it the world that's not a world, or something like that. He said we were at an intersection. I gave Sean my best imploring look. I'm only repeating what he told me. I'm serious. He couldn't tell me any more than that because something came that scared him off. Again, those knitted brows of his, and I realized that I loved how Sean looked when he was thinking hard. He squirmed on the stool. What was it that scared the lizard off? The lizard called it a demon. I saw the goose flesh rise on Sean's arms. It was clear he took my story seriously. A demon, he repeated. He said that the demon had broken into the gray world and needed to be killed, but not by him since he was not powerful enough to do it. The screech of that foul creature echoed in my mind, as well as the cold blue fire sweeping over my head. I shivered. So we ran, and ran and ran until I tripped and the lizard ran off without me. I got up and kept running until I came out of the gray world right into the middle of the intersection. And that's when Mr. Duff hit me with his car. The story sounded so wild as I explained it, that when I had finished, I was sure Sean would be laughing in my face. I wouldn't blame him for running as fast as he could away from me, the crazy girl in his class who had a crush on him and, oh, by the way, who also spoke to lizards and fell into other worlds in her spare time. But Sean still didn't laugh, or smile, or give any hint that he felt like running from me at all. Instead, he looked away for a long moment as he collected his thoughts, then turned back to me. A demon, he said thoughtfully, a dark edge to his voice. Yes, I nodded, a bit confused. That's what I said. The look on Sean's face told me that something about the story troubled him deeply. He grunted and looked down at his shoes. It's odd, is all. It was my turn to frown at him. What's odd? Sean squared his shoulders, as if he was subconsciously trying to look tough. Nothing. What did this demon look like? His questions seemed too pointed to be simple curiosity, but I decided to oblige. I couldn't make all of it out, but it was huge, and it had giant dark wings and a dark body, and it breathed blue fire. Fire that was blue because it was cold, not hot. It also made this awful screaming sound that just made your blood curdle. I stared right into his eyes. It looked like a nightmare, but it was real. Sean's eyes had widened so far that I thought maybe he'd seen a demon too. But before I could ask him what was wrong, the doctor came in to look me over. After 10 minutes of questions and poking and prodding, he declared that I had no concussion and was fit to go home as long as I wore the neck brace for the next few days. Then my dad showed up at the same moment the doctor headed out of the room. Dad's face told me everything I needed to know about how worried he was. I'd rarely seen him quite so pale. You okay, Germaine? What did the doctor tell you? What happened? I smiled at him and showed him my hands and feet. Everything still works, I said. My head and shoulders are just a bit banged up. The car didn't hit me very hard. Dad didn't look entirely convinced. No concussion? Nope, He closed his eyes in relief and sat down on the edge of the bed. Oh, you had me scared, especially since it wasn't you who called me. He directed a glance to Sean, who had rolled away on the stool to make room in the cramped space. Sean stood up and produced a hand, which my dad shook. Yeah, sorry, Sean apologized. But your daughter's hands were kind of tied down to a board at the time, so she couldn't make the call herself. I'm Sean Ellis, by the way. Germaine is working with my little brother. The comment made Dad chuckle and seemed to put him at ease, again making me marvel at how well Sean handled certain situations. My heart also warmed when I heard him talk about me working with Peter. He sounded more accepting of me now, although only time would tell if that was true. The nurse appeared with my discharge paperwork. Dad took it, then shot a glance at me. Ready to go home, kiddo? Please, I replied, sliding my aching body off the bed. Dad turned to Sean. Thank you for all you've done today, Sean. Care for a lift back home? Sean nodded. That would be great, thank you, sir.